Well, thank everybody for coming. I'm Scott Edelman. I'm going to be reading a story called The Only Wish Ever to Come True that was published in Talebones magazine a year or so ago, and it's a fantasy story because we're trying to keep to a fantasy theme today. And I will just dive right in. The only wish ever to come true. From the beginning, all I ever wanted to do was help people. That's why I've been blessed with this job. That's why I've been cursed with this job. And that's why, for thousands of wishes and thousands of years, God wouldn't let me quit. I remember the first time I tried to help. The first time, that is, after what I'd originally done to catch his attention, and he decided to treat that initial mistake as some kind of unintentional audition. And my blunder signaled to him that this was the job, or perhaps, as I later came to realize, the punishment for me. I wasn't yet trapped in a bottle back then, nor in a clay urn, nor even in the simple chiseled space between two flat rocks held together by vine. No, back then I was still free, not yet hemmed in by a prison meant to remind me of the folly of trying to help as only he can, though there are times when I think that should instead be as only he's allowed to get away with. I was free to observe, free to learn, and most importantly, free to prove myself, to show that my first failure had been but a fluke, that I could indeed make people happy by delivering over to them their dreams. I was so foolish for so long, yet even now, with so many centuries having passed, when I look back on that first attempt to set things right, when I look back on all my attempts, I think, why shouldn't it have worked? Why shouldn't it always work? Only he knows why. The man did not seem as the men of the modern world. He was hunched over, his back bent, his fists close to the ground, his brow magnificent. When I saw him through the brush, he was looking for a mammoth and hoping for a trophy with which to impress his tribe. He was naked, as many men of those times still were. Shame, after all, had only recently, with my help, been invented and had not yet become a fashion. He moved with what he thought was stealth, and yet I could still track him. Acuity has always been one of my gifts, even back when I crawled through the garden. And so I was alert to his desires when he first became aware of the mammoth, sensing them even over the rumbling of the ground as the great beast moved. At first, unsure of my new role, I did nothing, merely watched patiently as the man danced about the creature, who, in its repose, seemed more annoyed than frightened. And why should it not have acted so? As of that day, mammoths had very little reason to fear man. The man shouted at the beast and threw stones at it and tried to urge it to the edge of a cliff, which I knew he knew was nearby, but it would not be hurted. The mammoth trumpeted mightily at the man who cowered and ran away. I chose to follow the man, and when he paused in his frustration against a tree, grumbling to himself with sounds that had not yet become language, I slithered to shoulder height and spoke. I slipped pictures inside him that would allow him to understand me and let us talk, if talking it could yet be called. I showed him that I could grant a wish for him. He showed me what it was that he desired. And then I gave that thing to him and fled and waited to see whether on this second attempt my help would actually help. He looked down at the spear that was suddenly in his hands, its sharpened stone held tight with plaited vines at one end of a straight branch, and he was happy. As I was to learn, my actions would always leave him happy at first. He returned to the site where I first met him. The mammoth had hardly moved. It looked annoyed again to see the man return, but this time was able to hold that look but briefly until my spear pierced an eye socket and then its brain. Then it roared and pounded at the earth and quivered and stiffened and fell, nearly crushing the man, and then was no more. The man raced back with news of his triumphs to the members of his small tribe, any one of whom I could have chosen. Why him in particular? His need was the greatest, I guess. They marveled at the spear which he kept tight in his hands and would not let any of them hold. He returned back to the scene of his kill with as many as would follow to show off his achievement. They were stunned at what they saw, and while some tore the meat from the bones, others celebrated him, carrying him back upon their shoulders to the cave. That night, while he lay by the fire, he was not lonely, because the women of the tribe came to him, rewarding him for his great leap forward. And also that night, while he slept, exhausted, the chief of his tribe bashed in his brains with a rock, one that did not need to be sharpened and attached to a stick to fulfill its destiny. And then the spear, born out of one man's desire, belong to another. So it has ever been. Since God mistook my desire to help back in the garden for a desire to sabotage, whatever I gave to any of them, they quickly regretted. Whatever I did to change their lives could not be undone. And so, a man who wished his wife more beautiful also unintentionally wished her less attentive to him. And because of both of these changes, she was eventually stolen away. And the peasant woman who wished to better feed her family found that her wishes filled them with gout and heart disease. And the king who wished himself to be a kind ruler also found himself overthrown. Centuries went by, centuries of wishes granted and wishes backfiring, and did I learn any lessons from them? No, not the ones he intended. I railed against him, accused him of sabotaging my desire to help. He had made humans as fragile people, prone to impetuous desires, and that, I insisted to the heavens, is where the fault lay. It is so difficult for his children to get things right, and many of them never realize how wrong they've gotten it until too late. And so an orphan child who longed for parents got them, but only to find himself sold by them into slavery, and a blind man who wished for sight received it, only to discover that the world was not as beautiful as his dreams. And a composer who prayed for the talent to make God weep did make him weep, only to inspire a jealous rival to come along to poison him. I've heard it said that people should be wary of what they wish for, but what I think is that they should be wary of wishing altogether, because when I am near, when I sense desire quicken, I grant those wishes freely, which means they always come true, and which is what I've been taught, and unfortunately they always end badly, which is something that I also have been taught. But don't blame me. Blame him. That's what I did, loudly, angrily, and blasphemously, which is why after millennium he appeared to me once more. The sky darkened and a great pillar of cloud swirled before me, and I was afraid. And yet I also realized that I truly missed his presence. Why do you continue to place the blame on me, he said, the heavens roaring, rather than on yourself? This is how you have behaved from the beginning, and this saddens me. No, my Lord, I do not blame you, not truly, I could not blame you. I only want to serve you, which is what I've always done, which is why I set out to make men happy. But happy you cannot make them, for that is my job, and my job only. That was your mistake at the beginning. You cannot give them what they were not meant to have, and so you blame them. What you fail to understand is that since I made them, blaming them is blaming me. But you gave them free will, Lord, and so it is that will, not you, which has led them astray as I try to help them. They do not know what to make of your single wish. The pressure is too great for them, my Lord. The sky grew calm, and for a moment I thought the Lord had left me. But then he spoke again, this time with a noise less forceful. What would you have me do? Would you have me allow them more than one wish? My heart leapt. I would never have dared ask for such a thing, never have dared hope. Yes, my Lord, please, my Lord, I only want to help your people, you know that. With that many wishes, I'm sure I'll be able to praise you, my Lord. And I will let them have 3 wishes, though I do not anticipate that the additional 2 wishes will bring me praise nor you. And so now they will have the first to wish with, as always. With the second, they may now wish that first wish away if they wisely realize that in their impetuousness they have wished wrongly. And they shall still have a third wish, to wish yet again, so that we may see if they've learned anything from their failure. Thank you, Lord. Then go, old one, and we shall see if you have learned anything from your failure. And then the clouds parted, and the rainbow arced the sky, and though locked inside the bottle which by then entombed me, I went to do his work. You can surely guess, if you know of his ways and of the layered legend of wishing what I beheld over the intervening centuries. I learned what, had I been wiser, I should have anticipated he would have me learn. And so a preacher who wished that his voice would be more moving so that he could inspire his flock closer to the scripture was given a voice that to his horror moved him closer to war than peace. And then with his second wish he proclaimed, that's not what I meant at all, which turned out to be the subtext of all second wishes, and wished for the war to end. It did, though with the death of all his people. He wished them alive again with his third wish, and come alive they did, but they were broken and wounded and unable to procreate. And after the passage of not too many years, the preacher was the last of his people. And a horse, for as the Lord knows, none of his creations is exempt from wishing, who trudged along on a farm pulling a plow, wished that he could be as swift in life as he was in dream. And when he became so, his master sold him from his happy lot, because he could not afford to keep a horse so fine. and the horse was beaten by men who wished him to run in circles around a track. His second wish stripped away his speed and brought him home again, but his master beat him then because he thought the horse had run away and was only pretending to have lost his fleetness. So with his final wish, the horse grew wings so he could race across the sky, and as he leapt toward the moon, he was shot by hunters who thought him a wild turkey. And a man who was always late, and who knew how much this annoyed his spouse, wished for the power of punctuality. Only once it was granted him, and he began arriving on time where he was not yet expected. He learned what his friends really said about him, that his wife was having an affair. He used his second wish to put things back as they were, and then spent years debating what his third wish should be, keeping me locked by his side and unable to aid another, and in despair of ever arriving at a perfect wish, committed suicide. That extended solitude almost drove me mad. So, you see, wishes are painful to me, and yet, as I am buffeted about the world by the tides of desire and brought into contact with the hopes of mankind, I cannot help but try to fulfill them. And if I do, whose fault is that? Because that is how I've been made. That is my nature. I can see no greater goal than this. It all changed when I met another who felt the same way. And as it turned out, it was there, not back in the garden, where my story truly began. His wife, having left him, the boy sat, his shirt front soaked by tears, under a tree near where they first met. I call him a boy, but he wasn't, not as you understand boys. It's just that after several thousand years, they all seemed like children to me. He only wanted to help her, or so he believed, but she would not let herself be helped, or so he also believed. And as he thought for the thousandth time, another sentence that began, if only she would let me, I appeared to him in the manner I always appeared to those in need. One moment he was there alone, and the next I was there with him in the form of a bottle set next to him against one of the tree's exposed roots. The boy looked down at me, suddenly noticing that I was there, but thinking nothing odd about my presence. He lifted me up and held me to the light that bled through the smear of clouds. He almost put me down again, but then something called to him, something always does. And so he twisted the cap, feeling a sense of anticipation, but not knowing why. A mist enveloped him, and then I dropped to the grass like a dew. He knew immediately why I was there. They often do. I usually only need to explain myself once every decade or so. I've heard of such things, he said, but I never thought them real. In your heart, you've always known such things were real, I said. You're right, I guess I did. So, I said, what will it be? What do you mean? What do you want? How should your life be made better? Money, power, women? Of course, if you have enough of any one of them, they're all the same thing. I don't want any of these things. I only want her. He sobbed, and in that pause I started to tell him the many ways in which he could have her, intending to leave out the ways in which things could go wrong, such as that she could return as a zombie, as someone brain dead, as someone who had come to resent him and want him dead. But before I could even explain the basics, he continued with his plea. I only want her to be happy. I only want her to be her best self, but the way she was raised, I don't think she could bear to be her best self. I want nothing for me, but I wish I could help her. Then he spoke the words I've been waiting to hear for years without even realizing it. What you do, he said, helping people, making their wishes come true, that must be so rewarding. What? I said, too stunned by what he'd said to speak any further. It must be rewarding, he repeated, helping people, having the power to make dreams become reality. I searched the heavens for a sign. Did you send him to me, God? Is it finally time? Do you feel I've already earned my release from the cycle of failure? I didn't know, I couldn't tell, and I didn't care. All I knew was, here was one who was like me, or rather, like I was at the beginning of time. Is that really what you want, I asked? Is that what you'd spend your wish on? My job? You wish to be me? He wiped what tears had not evaporated from his cheeks and nodded. Yes, he said. I will say it plainly. I wish us to switch places. Let me help people. Let me help her. No one has ever asked me for that before, I said. I don't know whether I can do something like that. But then I thought, why not? God has never placed any limits on wishes before. My children should not always get what they want, he had told me so long ago. There was almost no before. That was what led you astray in the first place. You want to see what happens when they do? Fine, you will. Why not, I said, and the boy beamed. Suddenly I could see it no more, and it was my turn to be enveloped in a fine mist, as he had been. And then he was gone. There was no longer a bottle laid against a tree root. To where he had gone I had no idea, the same way in which I'd never had any idea where I would be when I popped into existence while on my long journey. I only knew that my prison then held another. The fate I thought eternal had been lifted from me. I sat by the tree under whose branches my emancipator had first met his beloved, and as he done, cried. After I had cried enough tears to make up for the centuries without them, I left the park. I walked down city streets through crowds that did not call to me, propelling myself forward with my own will, and my own will only, not servant to the pulls of others' wishes that would yank me this way or that. Freedom from the ties of man was a beautiful thing. Even more beautiful was looking into the faces of those who passed around me and not being able to discern their wishes in the slightest. That woman there, out of breath and bound by clothing that embraced her too tightly, avoiding her reflection as she passed the department store window, did she wish to lose weight? I had no need to fear that my help would cause her to starve to death, or have a limb amputated, or lose her weight in the form of an abandoning husband. That hangdog man looking at the sky, I'll never know if he feels defeated by gravity and wishes to fly, and so won't be the cause of his slipping off a ladder, or being pushed off a tall building, or dying of a heart attack during a far too exhilarating dream of flight. For the first time in my life, I was able to leave well enough alone. My desire to help was at last where it belonged, in my heart. Though it was difficult, however, after all those centuries, to refrain from making wild guesses, from measuring each passer-by for his or her wish, the same way I imagined a tailor might reflexively, even when on vacation. But at least I no longer wished to make the word the deed. I knew at last there was only one who could do that. Well, actually two. God, who started me off on this journey, and the one who volunteered to take my place. An old man swept the street around his fruit and vegetable stand, and as I watched him work, I smiled at his opacity. I nodded to him and took an apple from its neat pyramid, reminded of how this all began. Thought the apple was just an apple, and as I was about to take a bite, I heard a woman scream. I turned to a sight that had confronted me 1,000 times before. A ball was rolling out onto the street as behind it a child ran after, and behind that boy rushed a woman. There was nothing special about the blow, nothing special about the squeal of brakes or the thud that came after. There was nothing special about the crowd gathered round either, their anonymous faces bathed in curiosity and fear. The only thing that made this setting special was that this time I wandered over to them as one of them, rather than being willed into existence by a survivor's agony. Instead of appearing nearby, ready to be decanted, I looked down and suddenly felt lost. I'd never seen a dying person I could not help, but I was seeing one now. I was supposed to be able to look into her eyes, read her desires, and lead her back to a life of some sort, however abbreviated, however far away the wishes might take her from the wish's intent. This time, all I could see in her eyes was death. Seeing this, my desire to help welled up again, could not be put down again, no matter how I tried to tell myself that I had learned my lesson. I thought, I must bring her back, I must. And in that instant, the man to whom I'd given my power stepped beside me from out of the crowd. "Do you really want her brought back?" he asked me. And though I knew in my heart the place to where wishes take us, I answered yes. The woman, her limbs folded on the pavement in impossible positions, moaned where there had just only been silence of the most unechoing kind. She shuddered, and her eyes opened wide. She was back with us once more, thanks to a wish, thanks to my wish. I turned to thank my benefactor, but he was gone. The woman sat up suddenly and pushed aside the amazed paramedics who'd been tending to her. The child, who she'd risked her life to save, dropped his ball and ran to her. He hugged his mother, who seemed not to recognize him at first, but then the woman's eyelids fluttered and she looked at him as if for the first time. And when she saw the boy, she began to scream to tell him what a bad child he had been for disobeying her like that and running out into the street. She dragged herself to her feet and began beating him. Even after my centuries of training, I was still too stunned to react, and so it was the paramedics who held her back, and it took all of their strength to do so. And as I looked at all this, suddenly a participant instead of a catalyst, I realized once more the futility of wishes, even my own. And so I turned away from the mother's bellowing and the child's scream. I pushed through the crowd, peering hungrily into every face, desperate to find the young man who had now become me. I had to tell him, take it all away. Put it all back as it once was. It was meant to be. Let there be no more of helping. That child, what had I now doomed him to? As with all wishes, he would undoubtedly have been better off before. No man's story is made the better for having been altered. But I could not find him, and so I stumbled away in tears at what I caused, feeling their pain all the more for it having been my wish, muttering, take it away, take it all away. And the next thing I knew, I was gone from that street corner, gone from the world as it had become. But instead of being put back but moments previous, before a child's ball bounced into the street, before I held an apple that was only an apple, I was instead suddenly thousands of years back. I was back in the garden again, back before my fall. The boy who now carried my blessing and my curse had taken away not just the recent present, but everything. For a moment at first I was peaceful. The air had a purer air than I tasted since God had sent me from the garden. I wept at the sights that surrounded me. There'd never been a greener green, the lion still frolicked with the lamb, and most amazingly of all, the fruit of the tree was still untouched. The garden was as beautiful as I'd remembered, almost too beautiful to bear. I was grateful for a second glimpse of the face of God made real. But then my tears of gratitude changed to tears of fear. I knew the future that was waiting for me here, waiting for the whole human race. I knew what would happen next if I saw the first ones again. I would, irresistibly, want to help her again, help him. I could not allow myself to look on them again, not knowing as I did what was to come, how my actions would mean that she was destined to conceive in sorrow and he was fated to walk among thorns and thistles. I was too weak a being to remain there. I had to get out of the garden, and luckily I had one wish remaining to set me free. I knew that the new granter of wishes would not be able to find me back there, and so I needed to call upon the Lord. I looked to the sky and begged him to show himself, or at least that aspect of himself that he thought I could handle without being blinded by his glory. "Welcome," he said, a pillar of smoke that thrummed to the rhythm of his words. "I knew that eventually you would find your way back here. Did you manage to learn anything on your journey, my little one?" "I have learned that I have 3 wishes and I must use my 3rd one." The Lord chuckled, shaking the ground beneath me. "You are very direct," said the Lord, "but you are also very wrong. No, I'm afraid you already used all 3 of the wishes it has been your turn to receive." "But with my first wish I brought that dying woman back to life, and then with my second wish I brought myself here. There should still be one more to take me from this place. I only wanted to help, and if I remain here I'll cause the greatest hurt of all." The Lord laughed again, and as the ground trembled I tumbled to my knees. "You really thought that first wish belonged to the poor beside lover you found weeping beneath the tree? No, that was yours. You were weary of your journey, and though you had not yet voiced it as such, desperately wanted the burden of wishes lifted from you. In my generosity I allowed your wish to be granted. 1, 2, 3, and now you are back here where it all began for you, with no wishes to whisk you away. Let us see what you make of your life this time." And with that, the Lord was gone. And the first one stepped up beside me, their faces innocent. Their smiles were welcoming, and I had never seen anyone so pleased to see me. They were naked, as they were meant to be, before I taught them otherwise. It had been thousands of years since I'd seen them, but those years vanished away in an instant. Basking in the glow of their skin, I loved them as I loved no others, not even the Lord. They looked so young and trusting, but I knew that if they trusted in me, they would regret it, as they had when we last met. I still felt the charitable tug inside that made me a good Samaritan before the good Samaritan even existed. I wanted to help them, but I knew of only one way to help, and I knew where that would lead us. "Where have you been?" asked Eve. "We've been searching for you for days." "We've missed you," said Adam. "We've looked everywhere. Where were you hiding?" "I've missed you as well," I said. "I've missed you both." Looking at them, ignorant without knowing themselves ignorant, needy without knowing the meaning of need, I knew exactly how I had to help them, just as I had known what course of action I had to take thousands of years ago. Only this time, I'd help them best by helping no one. I knew what came from helping. I turned from the first ones and moved swiftly away as they called after me to tell me how much they loved me. Because I loved them too, I continued moving until I could hear them no more. I continue moving still. I will shun them. I must, because all I ever wanted to do was help people. Soon I will move through the garden gates and head out into the troubled land beyond, far from Adam, far from Eve, far from the tempting trees, and far from the love of the Lord. It will not be an easy life, but that does not matter. What matters is this: if I can stay away to help the first ones in that way, so that they will remain in the place in which they were created, then it will mean that of all the wishes made since the beginning of time, I'll have been granted the only wish ever to come true.